So we're going to talk today about how to integrate evidence into your papers here, so that you all can get the textual evidence standard. From what I've seen in your writing so far, it looks like we're not 100% on how to do this, so this is going to be useful. Please set up a notes entry with today's date, and for the topic, go ahead and call it integrating quotes. Integrating quotes here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So there are a few things to consider here when you are putting a quote in your paper. These are the things that you need to put sort of in the paragraph before, during, and after placing the actual quote. So take a look here at before. Before you use evidence, you always want to offer some context by talking about who said this quote and what is happening in that scene. Some of you are already doing this, some of you not so much. So remember, you want to imagine that your reader is not intimately familiar with the text, and you have to tell them what's going on in this chapter. Who's talking to whom, what's the tension. Just set the scene a little bit with like one sentence or so before you throw the quote in. Then, as you introduce the evidence, this is really important. Very few of us are doing this right now. As you introduce the evidence, there are a few ways to correctly integrate the quote. You can either use a verb and a comma, or a complete sentence and a colon to weave the quote into your larger sentence. We'll look at some examples in a minute here, but for now, just write this one down. After you use the evidence down here, you always have to explain why that evidence matters. You don't want to assume that it speaks for itself and make your reader do the work of interpreting the evidence. If texts spoke for themselves, there wouldn't be so many different versions of Christianity based on the same text, right? People interpret it different ways. In the same way, people are going to interpret books and your words in different ways. You have to tell them why it matters and how to understand what you're trying to tell them. Then you've got to make sure you clearly tie your quote back to your thesis, and of course, make sure that you cite that quote. And there'll be examples of this here in a minute. So make sure you've got these three things here written down as what you have to every time you use the quotation. So let's see some examples. The first way to integrate a quote is with a verb and a comma. So for example, Nick says, here's my verb, my action word, right? Any sort of speaking verb will do, like says, comma, quote, no, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. Then I've got my citation in MLA format. All that means is this right here, Fitzgerald 2. I have parentheses, and between those parentheses, all I put is the author's last name and the number of the page that it occurs on. Notice that I don't put page in there. I don't put a P. I don't put PG. I don't put a comma, just Fitzgerald 2. Then I want you to see that my period goes all the way out here after the citation and the quote. I don't put my period until I'm done with all of that. So that's the first way. Nick says, Fitzgerald writes, Gatsby screams, Tom insists. Find some creative ways to say says, even if it means looking up synonyms. The second way that you can properly integrate a quote is with a complete sentence followed by a colon. So, for example, Nick mentions Gatsby's fate in chapter 1. That's a complete sentence. So if I want to, I can put a colon after it and write, no, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. Fitzgerald 2. Again, my citation works the same way, author's last name and number, in parentheses, and then my period. The third way, and this is the fanciest, I think it feels the most sophisticated, so maybe try to start working on this one if you're able to, is to naturally weave part of a quote into your own sentence. And the key part about this is that if you do this correctly, your sentence will not work without the quote in it. So, for example, Nick's assertion that Gatsby turned out all right in the end feels strange considering that Gatsby is shot. My citation here goes at the end of the sentence, not right after the quote, right? It goes at the end of the sentence by my period. And when I weave the quote in like this, I just put quotes around it where it starts and where it ends and sort of naturally let it be a part of my own sentence. So see if you can find ways to work yours in like that. Now, I want to be crystal clear here. What I don't want to see you doing is some sort of combination of the two, which might look like this. So this would be wrong. Nick says, colon, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. Fitzgerald, I don't actually know what page is on. Let's say 24. 24. This way, you're using the complete sentence colon structure and the single verb comma structure. You're sort of combining them. This is a no-go. Please do not Please do not do this. You either need to choose to say, Nick says, comma. Strike that one. Yep. Nick says, comma, and then you put your quote in there, or Nick says the following about Gatsby, and then you put your quote in there. Quote. But please do not sort of mix and match, like in this example. That's a no-go. Okay, so let's take a look at this applied here. Here is broken down what it looks like to properly integrate a quote into a larger paragraph. So up here at the top, I have my topic sentence highlighted in white, and this little marker here, right? Topic sentence. The Great Gatsby uses Gatsby's lavish parties to depict the materialistic culture of the lost generation. Okay, so I can get from that, right, that my thesis is probably something about materialism, partying, that sort of business. So that's what we can expect. Then here I've got my context, what's going on in the scene, who says it. It says, when Nick describes the transient party guests, he uses imagery to give the reader a sense of the fleeting nighttime joy. Okay, there's my context, setting the scene, I'm telling you who said it. He writes, okay, so I'm using the single verb and the comma feature. He writes, quote, in his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. End my quote. Here's my citation, Fitzgerald 39, period goes on the end. My last part here in the green is my explanation and my connection to the thesis. So it says, moths live short lives, are attracted to bright things, and only come out at night. Fitzgerald compares the party guests to moths, suggesting that the members of the lost generation are interested in fleeting, flashy lives. So I'm making it clear that's the interpretation part. I am not leaving anything up to my audience to interpret as far as what this quote means or why it's important. I'm doing the work for them. That's what you want to do. Tell them what you're going to say, tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Okay, let's work back into our body paragraphs here. Be careful that you are using one of these three structures. In all of your quotes, I don't want to see any quotes that stand alone as their own complete sentence. And I'll show you what that looks like really quick here so that we make sure we're not doing this one either. So what I really don't want to see you do is say things like this. Let's try that again. Yeah. All right. Nick discusses Gatsby's fate. Period. Gatsby turned out all right in the end. Gerald. This is also wrong. See how this is its own complete sentence? The quote stands all by itself on its own. That's called a naked or a hanging quote, and that's no good. We've got to make sure that we find some way of integrating it into our own sentence using one of these tools. All right, that's what I've got for you. Be careful that you do it on your own. Integrate, cite, and explain all your evidence. Let's work on those body paragraphs.